Picture England around the year 900. Not the cozy fantasy version with castles and tea. This is mud, smoke, and chronic diarrhea. The sun comes up, chickens scream, children chase each other through a village that smells faintly of wet sheep and regret. Life is simple. You farm, you pray, you hope no one arrives by boat with an axe. Because Vikings are still very much a thing. At this point, Europe looks less like a map and more like a buffet. The Vikings are sampling everything. England gets hit. A lot. By the 800s, large chunks of the country are under Danish control. The Anglo-Saxons eventually fight back, reclaim territory, and technically win, but not cleanly. The Vikings don't all leave. They settle, they marry, they farm. They hang around like house guests who never quite move out. Fast forward a bit. England now has a king who is, let's be polite and say, uninspiring. He dies. His brother takes over. Then that brother produces multiple sons with excellent timing and terrible planning. When the king dies again, nobody agrees on which son should rule. One camp says, the older one. Another camp says, not if we can help it. Politics, medieval edition. Eventually, one of these sons secures the throne. He grows up, marries into Norman nobility across the Channel, and has children of his own. One of those children is named Edward. Remember Edward. Now Edward's advisors come to him with a cheerful message. Those Viking settlers still living here, they might unite and murder you. Edward considers this and replies, essentially, then let's beat them to it. What follows is a massacre. The Danish king is furious. He invades. England falls. Then it's retaken, then lost again. England at this point is like a stress ball being squeezed by Scandinavia. Edward and his family flee into exile, landing in Normandy, where Edward spends 30 years absorbing Norman culture, language, politics, and ideas about power. He tries to come back once with his brother Alfred. That attempt ends badly. Very badly. Alfred is betrayed, captured, blinded with a red-hot iron, and removed from political relevance permanently. Edward escapes. He waits. Eventually, after several Viking kings rule and die, one of them finally dies without an heir. England, exhausted and leaderless, sends word to Normandy. Edward is invited home. He becomes King Edward of England, later known as Edward the Confessor. And this is where the real trouble begins. Being king in the Middle Ages isn't like inheriting a company with HR support. Power is fragile. Loyalty is rented, not owned. Edward needs allies. There is one man in England who already controls vast lands, armies and wealth, Godwin, Earl of Wessex. Unfortunately, Godwin is also the man who betrayed Edward's brother. Awkward. Edward briefly exiles Godwin. Godwin returns, apologizes loudly, and possibly brings a truckload of gold. Edward caves. He even marries Godwin's daughter. Godwin dies soon after, and his power passes to his sons. One of them stands out. Harold Godwinson. Harold is competent, charismatic, battle-tested, beloved by the nobles. He becomes Edward's right-hand man, practically a co-ruler. Then, Edward gets old. Very old. And very childless. For reasons that historians still debate, religious devotion, personal unhappiness, or sheer stubbornness, Edward produces no heirs. Which means England has a succession problem. Harold thinks, clearly this will be me. Some nobles mention Edward has a distant relative. Harold ignores that. But England isn't the only place watching Edward's deathbed. Across the Channel, in Normandy, there's a duke named William. William has a nickname, the Bastard. Not metaphorically, literally. He was born out of wedlock to a duke and a woman from outside the nobility. This did not make his childhood easy. William becomes duke as a child and spends years surviving assassination attempts, rebellions and nobles who think killing a kid is good politics. It works. He grows up ruthless, disciplined, and very confident in his right to rule. William and Edward know each other well. Edward grew up in Normandy. He surrounded himself with Norman friends. William believes, or at least claims, that Edward promised him the English throne. And to make things messier, Harold Godwinson once visited Normandy and swore an oath supporting William's claim. Possibly voluntarily. Possibly while William held his family hostage. Details. So when Edward lies dying in January 1066, 3 men believe the crown is theirs: Harold Godwinson of England, William of Normandy, and a third contender, Harald Hardrada, King of Norway. Hardrada is a legend in human form. He spent his youth as a mercenary, fighting across Europe, the Mediterranean, the Holy Land, and beyond. He amasses enormous wealth and a reputation for never losing. There's also an old agreement between earlier Viking rulers suggesting Norway might inherit England. Hardrada decides this is his final glorious conquest. 3 men, 1 crown. Edward dies. Harold announces to the assembled nobles that Edward named him king on his deathbed. Convenient. He is crowned immediately, the same day Edward is buried. No delay, no debate. William hears the news and explodes with rage. He appeals to the Pope, arguing that Harold broke a sacred oath. The Pope agrees. William now has divine approval to invade England. God is officially on his side. Almost. Because the wind refuses to cooperate. William's army waits in Normandy for weeks. Harold stations his army along England's southern coast. Everyone waits. Eventually, Harold runs out of food and sends his soldiers home. Bad timing, because at that exact moment, Harald Hardrada sails into northern England. Hardrada defeats local forces near York and claims the city. Harold hears the news and force-marches his army north at an insane pace. They surprise the Vikings at Stamford Bridge. The battle is brutal. The Vikings fight hard, but are unprepared. Many lack armor. Hardrada is killed. The Viking Age in England ends right there. Harold has won. He barely has time to celebrate. Because the wind finally changes, William sails. William lands in southern England with around 14,000 men. He builds fortifications and begins burning villages. Harold rushes south again, exhausted but determined. On October 14th, 1066, the 2 armies meet near Hastings. The English hold high ground and form a shield wall. The Normans attack with archers, infantry, and cavalry. The shield wall holds, again and again. Then the Normans retreat, the English pursue, the retreat is a trap. The shield wall breaks, the Normans turn. Chaos follows. By the end of the day, Harold is dead, likely struck in the eye by an arrow. William wins. He is crowned King of England. The bastard becomes the Conqueror. What follows is not peaceful integration. It is fire, castles, and repression. Norman nobles replace English ones. Castles dominate the landscape. Rebellions are crushed. England is transformed. Even the language changes. French words flood English speech, especially words tied to power, law, wealth, and refinement. The peasants raise cows. The nobles eat beef. And the English language becomes the strange, hybrid thing we speak today. All because in 1066, 3 men decided England was worth fighting over. And history agreed. Thanks for watching Echoes in History. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more stories from history. See you next time.